I'm kind of shocked that I gotta do this, but we need to talk LCD panels. Some of you have no idea what's going on. We've got a lot of monitors around. A lot of them. I've been doing a lot of monitor reviews. And I said something that set off a few of you. This is also an IPS type panel. IPS type panels are not really known for gaming. I said that, IPS is not really known for gaming or something equivalent to that. That's true. It's a thing sometimes. People get sucked into the specifications. But the specifications are often a lie and made up. It's like, whose line is it anyway? Except for monitor components and monitor displays. This display behind me is an OLED display. It maxes out at 120 Hz. But I'm going to show you that 120 Hz is faster even than 240 Hz. Without question. It is pretty nuts. But let's talk about some things first. Alright, first up, my favorite monitor that I love to hate on, the Samsung U28D 590D. This is an older 4K panel. Tom's reviewed it a while ago. Samsung specification says that this is a 1 millisecond panel. Let's see if they lied. This is our Zcam E2 M4. This is a micro 4/3 4K camera that's capable of capturing 240 FPS. It's capable of also 1/500th of a second to 1/2000th of a second shutter speed, meaning that I can save the state of the sensor in 1/2000th of a second, well, really 1/500th of a second, and then capture that at 240 times a second in 1080p. So what we can do is send a test signal to the monitor where we light up one square in this grid at a time, and then take a picture of it. And if most of the pictures have one square lit at a time, when this thing is running at, say, 1/120th of a second, and the panel is configured for 1/60th of a second, we can conclude that, yes, this panel is a 60 Hz panel. It can update in 1/60th of a second, which is 16 milliseconds. If we have more than one square on at a time, then it means that it's taking more than 16 milliseconds to update this grid, or to update the panel itself. Meaning that the panel itself can accept a higher refresh input signal, but the display itself is not physically capable of displaying that high refresh. And with the U28D 590D, we're not asking much. We're only asking for 60 Hz, 1/60th of a second, 16 milliseconds. Samsung says that the panel is 1 millisecond. Surely to goodness, it could do 16 milliseconds because it's 1/60th of a second, right? Right? As we can see from our high-speed footage here, no, that's a lie. It's a dirty, dirty lie. This panel struggles to update even in 16 milliseconds, let alone 1. That's a pretty exaggerated lie. This is an older panel, though. That monitor is from 2014. This PC World review says it's got a fast pixel response time. There's never been a more relative definition of fast. In case you're wondering, this is a TN type panel, so this was faster than IPS panels of the day, but is much slower than some of the IPS panels we're going to look at in just a minute. Now, just a quick note on panel types. I mean, when we're talking about this, there is something to be considered for panel types. I mean, TN, VA, IPS, PVA, if you really want to squint your eyes, OLED, quantum dot LED. There's some other more exotic panel type, micro LED, although those can be a little weird. Color accuracy and color reproduction are also important, but the stuff that I'm talking about today doesn't really take that into consideration. Generally, IPS monitors are better about color reproduction, but there's a whole cottage industry around the LG OLED displays because you can actually load LUTs directly on the display. You can do Rec 709 directly on the display. This is stuff that LG definitely frowns upon, but it is doable. And there's some really exciting things you can do with OLED that you normally would have to do with a higher end display. I've also got a Sony Cinema display that is packed into some Korean electronics. And the color reproduction on that is amazing, but the electronics are actually slower than the panel. So we don't need to take a look at it for this video. Just know that the different panel types matter a lot, depending on if you're looking for color accuracy, color gamut, the Adobe color space, sRGB color space, Rec 709, HDR also has entered the game. Player 3 has entered the game. And there are considerations that you have to worry about with all of that stuff. For this video, we're just talking about a high refresh. Is this panel that says it's 300 hertz really 300 hertz? And what does that mean exactly when we look at the panel at 300 hertz to see if it's 300 hertz? Not all that fancy color stuff. So let's take a look at the Pixio Hayabusa PX5. This is one of the fastest displays that I have, and it's actually very, very good. It's a 240 hertz display. They advertise it as a 0.6 millisecond response time, which would mean that you could do over 1,000 changes per second on this panel. But the question is, can this panel keep up? Well, I really should be capturing this at 500 FPS, but you're just going to have to settle for a shutter speed of 1/500th of a second, captured at 240 FPS. We can see some visual artifacts here. The square looks a little purple, or the color looks a little off. Now, this is supposed to be a gray square, but going from black to gray, it doesn't quite have a chance to turn gray. Some of the colors are faster than some of the other colors, and that's why it doesn't look gray. But this is a pretty good showing for this panel. Mostly we only have one square on at a time. It's not really the right color. The panel doesn't have enough time to turn on and come up to the right color and then turn off again. The electronics sort of know that this square pattern here was only there for 1/240th of a second, and it can compensate for that. Of course, that means that this panel is always going to be one frame behind because it has to look at the frame in order to decide how to display it. It can't trust that, it can't do just-in-time frame display. But that's not necessarily a bad thing at 240 hertz. It's 1/240th of a second behind, potentially. The panel type on our Hayabusa is a TN type panel, so this is not an IPS type panel, as we reviewed on the Predator monitor, which I will get to in just a minute. Now that 1080p monitor, it's about $300 street price, probably a little more because of the global situation. Let's take a look at a 4K monitor, also from Samsung, the UJ32. This is a much newer panel, much better than the U28D 590D. It tops out at 60 hertz, 1/60th of a second, but the showing here in the high-speed camera is actually very good for this display. It's not really lighting up two squares adjacently, so this panel is at least 1/60th of a second fast. And again, because this is a lesser expensive display, it's also like $300. It's not an IPS type panel. This is a VA type panel, and it's okay. Now, what about the Acer Predator monitor that I just reviewed? It's IPS. It's up to 144 hertz. Well, okay, yeah, it is up to 144 hertz input signal, but if we look at the high-speed footage, freeze frame, there's two squares lit up. Let's just randomly select a bunch more freeze frames. It's about two squares lit up. Sometimes you see three squares lit up. The panel physically just cannot respond at 144 hertz. Yes, it can accept 144 hertz input signal, and it is faster than 60 hertz to be sure, but it is nowhere near as fast as the 240 hertz panel that we saw from Pixio at 1080p. Of course, that it's like you're comparing apples and oranges. It's a 240 hertz versus 144 hertz. Well, the LG behind me is OLED. It tops out at 120 hertz. So let's look at the pattern with that. OLED. These are pixels that individually turn on and off. Instead of having a light behind a panel, whether that's from a compact fluorescent or an LED, with a light shining through liquid crystals of some type, TN, VA, IPS, whatever, having little tiny sources of light that turn on individually and turn off individually is way faster in terms of a response rate. So even though this panel is only 120 hertz at our high-speed footage, you will rarely, if ever, see two squares in the test pattern on side by side at any given time. What's more is, look, the color. The color is correct. These pixels turn on and they turn off. How crazy is that? That's why this panel technology is so insane. The LG does make an OLED computer monitor. It's like $3,000. Gigabyte, Aorus, they have a 48-inch OLED that has a built-in KVM, which is awesome. I haven't tried it, but again, OLED technology, that is the level of responsiveness and awesome that you can expect. Now, if you really do your homework on the LG OLED, the firmware has been buggy AF for years, for 3 generations of TV, for HDR, for variable refresh rate, for 2.1 with consoles. All of those things sort of mar the experience. You got to be careful to separate that in your mind from the actual panel display and the panel performance, because that is a different thing than the input signal. I mean, it's related, but really what we're taking a look at here is what's happening with the panel. Would you rather have a 300 Hz IPS gaming display or this? Hint, this is faster. I've also got the Pixio PX279P Prime, another great monitor. I mean, Pixio really does make some good stuff. It's good value stuff. Performs well. It's not overpriced. I like Pixio. I really do. I like them a lot. This is an IPS 1080p 240 Hz display, but you can see that the 240 Hz panel on the Pixio, at times in our high-speed footage, there are 3 squares lit. Now, this is a really fast panel, but it's not truly, from on to off 240 Hz. It'll accept a 240 Hz signal, and it'll respond really quickly. It'll begin to display that frame, but it can't get rid of the other frames quickly enough that they're not still on the screen. That ends up making the image a little blurry. Now, can you see that between 100 and 200 Hertz? No, not really. So, I mean, I feel like a lot of people will latch onto that as a criticism and of the display, and it is what it is. The difference between 60 and 120 Hertz is Mount Everest compared to the difference between 120 Hertz and 240 Hertz. There's really not a huge difference from 120 to 240, not like there is from 60 to 120. I mean, it's only a 60 FPS difference, and you're telling me that doubling that is not going to make that much of a perceptible difference in terms of the experience, and that's true. Let's also include the Odyssey G9 Neo from Samsung. It's 240 Hertz, right? 240 Hertz, that's definitely going to be faster than 120 Hertz. It's not even an IPS type panel. It's an even faster panel. So surely to goodness that panel is going to operate at 240 Hertz. Now, the Odyssey G9 Neo, check out my review on that, comes out of the box at 120 Hertz, but you can turn on a menu option to make it 240 Hertz. But again, when we see with the high-speed photography to see what's going on with the squares, it doesn't really operate all that well. It's probably somewhere between the Pixio Hayabusa, which is very good, and something that's kind of middle of the road. In my opinion, the 120 Hz G9 non-Neo and this, there's not really a lot of difference in terms of the actual panel refresh speed. It's kind of anti-consumer. Really, it's just bait. It's like, I'm going to buy this monitor and it's going to be twice as fast as the original G9. It's like, well, it'll accept an input signal that's twice as fast, but you're going to see both frames on the display at the same time. It's not actually going to make the panel operate at 240 Hertz because the G9 Neo, the actual panel itself, is closer to that 120 Hertz refresh than it is to the 240 Hertz maximum cap. So, best case scenario, I don't think you're really getting the difference there from 120 to 240 Hertz. It's so fast. Now, if you freeze frame this behind me, there's going to be lots of squares on at once. Why? Because the shutter speed on the camera that I'm recording on is only 1/60th of a second. If you're going to replicate this with a camera, you're going to want to set the shutter speed on the camera to be super high. You might not capture, it might not go from one square to the very next square to the very next square. That's okay. That just means your camera, it froze the frame and then is copying that to memory, and then it's going to freeze the frame again. So it's going to freeze the frame 1/500th of a second, but then it's going to do that, 200 times a second or 150 times a second or 100 times a second or whatever it is. And you will occasionally, because of the clock misalignment between when your camera is taking the picture and what the display is doing, occasionally you will get two adjacent squares. But if you constantly get two adjacent squares and you have your stuff set correctly, it means the display is actually displaying two squares at the same time. So what's the big takeaway? Just remember that review of that really ancient Samsung U28D 590D. It said that the panel was 1 millisecond. Pretty much everything today says the panel is 1 millisecond. That's not exactly true. It's never exactly true. There's no one that's really looking at this defining how these specs should be advertised. So you have to use resources. Good, there's great resources actually, like Artings for monitor timing and things like that, to look at the panel and look at the pros and cons and look at the timing. And so when I say things like, IPS, not really historically known for gaming, we're only just now entering an era where an IPS display is good enough for gaming. But compared to non-IPS technologies are still faster. And really, very little can hold a candle to OLED. This 120 Hz panel runs circles around every other panel of any type that I have tried, even ones that support greater than a 120 hertz input. And now I hope that it makes sense as to why that is, because that's maybe important in your monitor buying stuff, because I'm not actually recommending you buy an LG CX as a gaming monitor. There's definitely downsides for that. But just looking at this one tiny piece of it and focusing on it, well, that's today's obsession. I'm Wendell, this is Level 1, I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums.